Welcome everyone, welcome to my December Refined tier list update. As per usual, we'll be looking at this month's patch, but also before we start, I have moved a few people on the tier list, so let's get started on this. So, well, to put it simply, Soren went from A to B because his refine does nothing for him. 9 times out of 10, you're going to refine his weapon to defense instead of the Altom effect, because the Altom effect just doesn't synergize with his stat line at all, and just is overall extremely awkward to even use in general. It's nothing like Ray, who actually can use an Altom stat line, because in his case he just doesn't really have a def stat to really push that forward. And on top of that, the speed you get from the Altom is typically, outside of the first person that's next to you, typically more or less useless, especially at high merges. So it's not really helpful to him. I've also increased Marth and Brave Lucena from S to S, from S- to S, sorry. The reason is quite simple. I've never really felt that Marth should be in S- in the first place, and for Brave Lucena, she just kind of got better as time went on. When she was first released, there was so few units I could think of that could really use her buff, but now as time goes on, every new banner introduces at least one new unit that can really abuse it. Like, for the Thracia banner, there's Ossian and Avel. The banner before that was Igren. I think there was someone else. Echidna also, to some extent, can use this. So, oh, and also Ross from the banner before that. I guess to some extent also Garrick, but Garrick is just a worse Ross. So, as time goes on, there's just more and more options that really work with Brave Lucena. So right now I do feel it's a lot more fitting to be in S tier than before. It's just that back then, the amount of unit that could really abuse Lucena were like in the single digits. Now it's actually in the double digits, so it feels a lot less niche, and just a lot more all-around good. There's still the issue of the fact that you can't really use dragons or tomes in a team comp with her, but that's why you use Marth. So it really comes down to what your team comp is, though I do feel Marth is still the more flexible option for obvious reason. Other than this, Lon'qu was in S tier, and I'm surprised no one pointed this out because there's no reason for him to be here. The reason Raven is in S tier is because there's two reasons. One, his attack is in trash, so life and death is actually helpful for him. Or rather, it's also helpful for Lon'qu, but Lon'qu has so much speed that it's super overkill for his speed. Hell, his base speed is overkill, let alone with that. And killing your bulk to get 5 attack is not exactly the way to go. Raven, on the other hand, can actually kinda use the speed to some extent, and also, more importantly, his attack still gain from it. I will still say Linus is overall the better user, and honestly, now that I think about it, I should have maybe lowered him down to S- still, because Linus is just a straight upgrade to him. I will probably do this next time, but Lon'qu, on the other hand, just doesn't really gain too much from life and death. The speed is just overkill, the attack is nice, but at the cost of 5 death and res, it's not exactly worth it. Linus is the best user of it, because he has like 33 speed, which can be a bit shaky at time. In fact, if you have a unit with that low of a speed, you typically want to refine to speed anyway. So having life and death is not a waste, and the 5 attack is never a waste, especially considering it makes him one of the best melee AoE user. So yeah, it's actually really good on Linus. It's definitely like a level over Raven by quite a bit, so consider Raven to S- then. And the last one was Roy. Roy was in S tier before I downed him to S- because I'm gonna be honest, it did not really age well, and honestly, it should never have been in S tier in the first place. The refine is good, don't get me wrong, it's a good refine. But Dragon Effectiveness lost a lot of its luster over time. The 4 def res that you get from the bracing stance that he has in his weapon is cute, but it's not really game-changing. And Quick Riposte is kind of the worst offender of all this, because you typically go speed plus on Roy anyway, and he's this weird unit that really gains from every single merge, because he gains from attack, speed, def, and res. All of his stats are important. But because you go speed plus, you typically end up having enough speed that Quick Riposte becomes obsolete. Honestly, I might even down him an extra tier as a result, because Quick Riposte just does not do much for him. Bracing stance is kinda helpful, don't get me wrong, but outside of this, it's kinda eh. Quick Riposte is mostly helpful to get rid of Wary Fighter, like, come on. There's better than this at that point. In a lot of cases, I would replace his weapon. Heart's Blade is a great example. Slaying Edge is still better in my opinion overall. It's just, if you need a Dragon Killer, it's there. It's just not amazing, is the thing. And I think that concludes all of our movement in terms of the tier list. I do have to remember to change Raven. Let me just write it down. Alright, so we'll start with Clive, surprising no one. So Clive and Matilda, I guess I can just really cover both of them at the same time as far as the weapon and what its usage is. This is just Yato. In case you don't know what Yato does, and you know, Yato is in S-, but that's also because the user of it actually has a good stat line. To put it simply, what Yato does is that it gives 2 across the board to Soren himself, post-refine anyway, and also it allows him to provide 4 across the board to whoever is supported to. This is more or less the same thing, but with an extra effect. You get 3 across the board yourself instead of 2 across the board, and you give 3 across the board to whoever you're supported to. The difference is that Soren does not need to be in range of anyone for the 2 across the board on his hand. And also, he gives more stat to the person. But at the same time, Clive and Matilda gets more stat from their own weapon. Oh, and I guess in Clive's case, he gets effective against armor. I have no fucking idea why he decided to do this. That is horrible. That is just a horrible choice. Honestly, they could just have copy-pasted the same weapon and it would have been just fine. Hell, if you really wanted, like, the armor effectiveness to be a thing, how about making so if you're in range of your partner, which limits you a lot, you also gain the ability of getting a brave weapon effect. I want to say this because, yes, people will obviously say, oh, this is a power creep to Est and Katria, me saying this. But you have to realize one thing. First off, Est and Katria have insanely good stat line. Matilda is a really good one as well, though, to be fair, but only because of merges and because of the weapon giving 3 across the board. And honestly, even then, Clive is just a worse Est, and Katria, Matilda is just a worse Katria, even if you gave them the Brave effect. Because you have to realize, you have to be within 2 space of a unit, and a specific one at that. That means you can't really split them apart, so gaining a Brave effect would not really hurt them that much. Could be multi-phase for all I care. That would still be fine for some extent, to some extent. And you can't even bring the fact that you can combo the 2 of them together, because, gonna be honest here? Yeah, 6 across the board, but both of them are a fucking Lance unit. You don't use them together. Est and Katria, first off, they're not horses. Horses kind of runs into one problem, which is the fact that they move so much. If you really want to abuse them, you have to be able to use their entire movement. So you have to be able to move up to 3 squares to attack, right? So if you have to be within 2 space of another unit, it kind of just reins it back down a little. And kind of screws you down at being a 2 movement instead of a 3. More or less. I think you get what I mean. You can't really stray too far from your partner for the brave effect to come out. So, yeah. Again, that's just me, like, theory crafting, I suppose. Personally, I gave Matilda, I believe I gave Matilda a special fighter. And, well, a conditional special fighter. And I gave Clive the Soul Lance before that one was ever released. So, there's that. But, yeah, since we don't have anything like a Brave effect or anything interesting to really go with the weapon, it's really restrictive. If you really want to abuse Clive, you have 2 units that are required for him to work, because otherwise his speed is too awful. The main one is Soren, obviously, because Soren, comboed with his weapon, basically gives you 8 across the board. You get 4 across the board from Yato, 1 across the board for being within 2 space, and then another 3 across the board because of Lordly Lance. At the same time, Soren at the other side gets 6 across the board, so it's not all bad. And unlike Matilda, that would also mean that you'd end up with a red that gets, you know, buffed to a decent amount. If you don't have something like that, or if you use Matilda rather, you end up having just 2 times the same unit, except one is obviously better than the other. Kind of awkward. So thankfully Soren is here to actually kind of balance that. And honestly, if Soren wasn't here, he would probably be A tier, if not B tier. It's just very awkward of a refine. The other person is Brave Lucena, obviously, and I guess to some extent Marth. But this one is a definitely very shaky case. And you typically have to like roll double drive speed at that point, instead of only 1 drive speed and then 1 drive res or something similar to that, to really abuse a stat line. Also, do note the first merge for Clive, I believe, is HP, attack, and def, so not exactly helpful. So here, a build. Now, like I said, this is mostly with Soren in mind, okay? Because if you don't have Soren in mind, this just doesn't work. With Soren, Lordly Lance, and being within 2 space, you get 8 across the board. And then 4 speed def res because of low attack speed. So essentially you end up with, and counting the bond, 73 attack. 46 speed. 54 def. And 45 res. Might have miscalculated. There's a lot of, you know, bonus stats here. With your first round of Dragon Flower, you can push that speed to 47, so you would not need to have a drive speed at that point to reach the magic number. And as far as res is concerned, you can just run double drive res on Soren, and, well, your 54 def is now accompanied with a 51 res. 54 def, 51 res. And you still have, well, if you consider all the flowers, that's actually 55 def and 52 res. And 47 speed, on top of 74 attack. So, it's really good. It's just extremely situational, because you're reliant on a specific unit. If you don't have Soren around to save your ass, you're losing a lot of stats. And if you have to run Marth, you have to actually give up on a drive res for a drive speed instead, because your speed is just not going to get to a decent enough number. So, yeah. If you guys want to build Clive, I'm sorry, but now he's shipped with Soren forever. Sorry, Matilda. I guess you are not the best woman after all. I'm just kidding. But yeah, it's definitely really good, but it's also extremely restrictive. And now for a better version of this, because Armor Killer is just, at this point, unless you have a Brave effect, or do something very unique on top of the Armor Killer, there's just no point. Like, in Est's case, she can literally obliterate a steady stance 4 plus 10 Cerner with little to no effort, and that's with a 4-star plus 10, not even 5-star plus 10. You don't even have to invest all that much, and she can slaughter anything that's armored. So, if all you do is being an armor killer, well, you might as well just be an inheritable armor killer, because you do just about as well. So, yeah, it's kind of really awkward for him. Again, straying off of his refine is kind of just not really working, and at the same time, there's just so many units that can be armor killers at that point, it's ridiculous. It's just not a niche anymore. In fact, it really hasn't been for a few months already. When a new character comes with armor killer, I'm just disappointed. I don't go, oh cool, what a great base effect. No, that's something I would say for, say, Tsubaki's base weapon. Because that's an insane pref, or insane base, mostly. Unlike this. But yeah. Moving on to Matilda, who's a tier above, purely because the base effect is just that much better. And you have to realize the people that she compete with are like Abel, which has a better offense and has a brave effect that's very easy to trigger. Yeah, so the fact that she's actually on the same tier is insane enough. Here's the build. Now, Matilda is a lot better because she's really not reliant on someone else. You can just run this without Brave Lucena, in fact. It's just that, typically, Brave Lucena or Brave Marth, Base Marth, Brave Marth would be a dream, except not this year, rather than next. But if you have, say, Marth with a drive speed, you're good to go on speed. Or rather, no, actually, you don't even need speed. The 2 speed you get from Marth alone is enough, because you get 3 across the board from Knightly Lance. At that point, you'll be at 48 because of the support itself. So, that's not bad. So you can actually, like, invest in defense instead. Or Def Res, rather. That's what I would do, personally. Because Attack Def Bond plus Drive Def, you're already at 45, 44. So I actually, no, I guess I would do Drive Attack, Drive Def. Ideally. Personally. So for the final stats, that basically would be 3 across the board from the weapon, 1 across the board because, you know, support. So you're already at 46 speed, with flowers you're already at 47. So, like I said, you don't really need to be with someone specific. I said Marth because Marth means no flower has to be spent. Though ideally you'll want to use Corin with her just as you would or Osbend. So I'll just consider the stat with Corin in mind, just so you can have a more proper comparison to Clive. So, again, 5 across the board because Yato and within 2 space. So 5, 5, 5, 5. Low attack def means 8, 5, 8, 8. Attack def bond means 13, 5, 13, 8. And then the weapon also adds an extra 3 to this, so hopefully I don't screw up, but so you get 3 from low attack def, you get 3 from the weapon, you get 4 from Yato, you get 1 from within 2 space, so that's 8, 11, attack def bond beat means 16, and that's without any drives on Corin, by the way. But typically you'd have drive attack def. Still 16, so 71 attack. As far as the speed is concerned, 50. You're already overdoing it, but that's fine. 71, 50. So you're already very similar to Clive. And as far as bulk is, well, you're in a bit of a better predicament, because first off, Clive cost a ton of grails. 2,200 in fact, if you have all the copies. Kind of a shame considering Clive has the best amount of character growth in the entirety of Echoes as far as I'm concerned. But outside of this, moving on. 42, 44, low attack def means 45, 47. Weapon pushes that to 48, 50. Yato pushes that to 52, 54 within 2 space, 53, 55. And I think that's it. 53 def, 55 res. With attack smoke, you are looking at 60 def, 62 res at that point. I'd say ideally the best partner for her though is Brave Lucena, because unlike Clive, which if you are using Brave Lucena with Clive, unless you're doubling the enemy, in which case you can use Ignis, you're kind of stuck to Moonbow or just overall not really good skills. Whereas Matilda can use Aether if she's in the same situation as her husband, which is consistent. Or she could also just use Iceberg in this case. Iceberg doing 27 damage on proc, which is not bad. And a lot more consistent than her husband. That's the problem. If you're comparing cooldown -1 to Armor Killer, cooldown -1 will always be better unless you're Est. Because Est just has an insanely good stat line. And on top of that, just an Armor Killer slays the only enemies that she actually struggles with, so it's a really good combo. But yeah. Moving on to Mia. Now, Mia's Refine is strange. Since it does not have cooldown -1, speaking of, it's a very straightforward Refine. There's only really one thing you can do with this, and it's definitely a lot more awkward than I'd like. But the one thing that she does do is kind of really good. AoE busting. Pretty sure everyone knows what I'm talking about at this point. But to put it simply, Navarre, which, let me just hide this for a moment. Navarre is in A+, and she's in S tier. Wanna know the big difference? An attack stat. Also the fact that there's a lot of true damage on there. To put it simply, with her weapon, she already gets easily 7, extra damage through her weapon alone. Then you have the fact that you have an extra 5 damage from Flashing Blade, so that's 12 damage. And her special gives you an extra 10 damage on top of that. That's 22 damage. So even if you have like 0 attack at that point, you're already doing 22 damage on the AoE itself, and then 12 on the following hit. That's 34 damage. Baseline. To put this in perspective, if you're dealing with a Surtur, as long as you do 20 damage with the AoE in the first hit, that is not true damage, but like, outside of the true damage itself, you're killing Surtur. Kinda gives you an idea of how insane this can be. And while her attack looks lame at 32, you have to realize her weapon is 19 might. So with attack plus, you're at 54 attack. At plus 10, you're at 58 attack. At plus 10 Dragon Flowers, you're at 60 base attack. Unbuffed. So, yeah. Another thing you can use instead of Flashing Blade 4, but that means you have to give up on Hardy Bearing because you have to use Flashing Blade in the Seal slot, would be Life and Death 4. I don't suggest this, however, because it hurts your bulk. And Navarre actually has the chance of being able to just instant charges AoE with very little setup. I believe just one person with infantry pulls, or you can just run what is it called? Time Pulse to start him up, or just Veloria. There's so many ways to set up at that point. It's kind of ridiculous. Quick Impulse is another one. He's so easy to set up that bulk doesn't really matter for him. He can actually go life and death 4. That's not really the case with Mia. And while yes, 7 attack would be translating to 10 AoE damage, I still don't think it's really worth it. The main thing though is that life and death 4 will actually increase your true damage from your weapon against those 1 or 2 very quick units you might have to deal with. Makes your weapon a bit more consistent once you get it going. The problem is once you get it going, and the second someone has Vantage, you're kinda screwed. So Flashing Blade 4 is a bit of a better choice here. So, yeah. This hits like a truck. And 64 attack is no slouch. Say you're dealing with a Surtur with... oh, I don't know, let's say 55 def. Well, 55 def, 64 minus 55, 9 times 1.5, that's 13. Your AoE itself gets 22 damage because of Resolute Blade, Flashing Blade 4, and Resolute Blade. So you do 35 damage on the AoE itself. It's already a good start. 64 plus 12 because of Combat Triangle, 76, 76 minus 55 equals 21. 21 plus 12, 33. 35 plus 33. You're killing the guy. By the way, keep in mind, Steady Stance 4 is not counted on the AoE itself. So yeah, kind of disgusting. And there's just no way to really tank the hit that's coming after. Because that's one of the things that can be dangerous. Because the AoE itself does a lot of damage, even against blue units. But the problem is after you have to deal with Combat Triangle to deal the next hit. That's not a problem for Mia because she gets so much true damage from her weapon anyway. So even if she just gets the enemy to 1 HP but then would do 0, she still is going to kill because of the true damage. Another reason why you want to have Life and Death 4, not Life and Death 4, Flashing Blade 4 over Life and Death 4. But yeah. It's overall really solid. It can be a bit awkward though. As I said, you have to set it up, and AoE busters on melee unit can definitely be a bit awkward at times. The extra range from ranged AoE users like Ophelia, Sonya, I guess my JMK for those people who have seen me doing, you know, the LHB MHBs with him, helps a lot. Because it's a lot easier to kill something and then back out after. With melee units, you typically are a all or nothing type of character, and if you don't have the bulk for enemy phasing, it can definitely get a lot more awkward than you'd like. Thankfully, Mia actually gets a decent amount of bulk. Savage Blow is also here just to deal damage to the people around you, so it's a lot easier to pick them off after. But yeah, time to move on. This time for Arthur. I wish it was not that big, but I mean, here we are. So, whichever debuff is up on this guy will basically just allow you to get 5 across the board. However, do keep in mind, this is not like Brunia. While Brunia can just soak chills, he can't really do that. Say he gets -7 across the board, he still ends up with -2 across the board, despite his weapon. So, the debuff part is not as helpful as it seems. Unless you're hit by something like Melancholy, or other type of debuff that are like this. Typically you'll want to just take damage instead of getting debuffed, because yes, you get hit by a chill, that's cool, but you still have a net loss from that stat. Even if you consider the base effect, you only get 1 point bonus. That's not exactly too great. Whereas a character like Brunia could literally have minus 20 across the board and still end up with 4 across the board. So it's kind of a huge boon for Brunia, not so much for Arthur here. So yeah, this is an easy setup. At least the base effect is a very easy setup. The main issue I find with Arthur is the fact that he's a bit of an awkward case. How do I put this? In a lot of cases, he ends up having too much speed once the effect go off. And in other cases, he ends up not having enough speed before the effect goes up. It's really awkward. So as a result, you kind of almost have to want to have too much speed for something else, you'll see. Or you want to just really hit that sweet spot, which again can be very awkward. So here's the first build. This is a really simple one. It's basically just because, again, this does not have cooldown -1. So in other words, yes, you get 8 across the board, but you basically just want to get hit and then proc. You can also do Ignis instead, but this requires Brave Lucena. Which, mind you, Brave Lucena is really good on him, because he's one of these units that really gains from every stat. As you can see, he uses his speed, he uses his attack, he uses his def, he uses his res. As you can see here, because of the buff, you end up at 61, 42, 46, 37. And of course, once the Brazen is off, that's going at 68 attack, 42 speed, 46 def, 44 res. Which is really good. You end up being very bulky, very quick, and hit really hard. But because your Brazen is off, the axe itself is also up, which means you get 5 across the board. In other words, in reality, you have 73 attack, 47 speed, 51 def, and 49 res. So you end up being fairly bulky, pretty decently quick. You hit the sweet spot essentially, and you hit very hard. The thing that makes him a lot better than Matilda and Clive, though, is that he's not really reliant on being somewhere special on the map with someone else, or forced to always be in the same team like Clive and Matilda are. He just can do whatever he wants. Yes, he has a lot of stats, and it's very similar to Matilda and Clive, because at the end of the day, they both get 8 across the board. But, well, outside of, the obvious infantry unit have access to better skill, there's also the fact that he just doesn't really care about where he is on the map, which is extremely helpful for him. So, yeah, it's overall a huge boon for him. Just do know that if you use him, you typically want to have a healer, but you don't want to bring a healer that can heal a lot. What I mean by this is, you want a healer that keeps him hurt, but not too hurt. Typically a healer with Martyr or Physics will do the job. Because you can't really heal him. You can't really run Aether. You can't really run Noontime. You can't really run Soul. If you run these skills, you end up just healing yourself, maybe sometimes too much, and healing back to full, losing the 5 across the board, and you're suddenly a lot worse. Which is very awkward as a result. As for the second set, yes, this is real. Don't you worry. This is indeed a thing. So, this is the one I was talking about having more stat than needed. Because you end up at 45 speed, but once you actually get hurt, you're at 50 speed, which is a bit too much. Still, you can actually use Close Call to make use of this. And, again, as I said, the main issue he runs into is the fact that he just doesn't really have any way to sustain himself without killing his weapon's effect. So, Close Call is a good second choice. Do keep in mind though, Soul in Noontime can still be used if you think that he's bulky enough to take hits anyway. It's just going to make your weapon extremely inconsistent. This is a Gale Force set, of course, so the idea is just to have 43 with 45 speed and 61 attack. Honestly, and 67 attack, actually, sorry. Ideally, you would want to use Speed Res solo, but that's not a thing yet. Speed Res solo would be ideal, because you'd get at a point where a close call is a lot more consistent as a result. 50 speed can be a bit iffy, so Speed Res solo pushing that to 56, definitely very helpful, and then you can have flowers on top of this. To a point where if you fight someone at 48 speed or less, they still lose 40% of their damage output. Which is really helpful. But yeah, this is overall fairly solid. It's just like I said, your first fight typically will be a bit problematic, because you will struggle at time to proc Gale Force, especially if you get chilled. Since you don't get rid of debuffs because of the weapon. So ideally, if you're going to be using him, I strongly recommend to have someone with at least one more point of speed than he does. This will make it a lot easier for him not to get chill, because it's the other dude that's going to get chill as a result, which makes him a lot more consistent. But also, your first fight, you might miss a double because 45 speed is a bit awkward, which again, if you have Speed Res solo, is not going to be a problem. But yeah, that's about all I had to say about Arthur here. Overall, fairly good refine. The one thing that really makes me happy about this whole refine tier list update is the fact that Clive is here. Not because Clive is good, but because it means characters like Finn can actually get their fucking pref. The fact that Finn did not come in with his pref Brave Lance, just give him Meister Lengths or whatever it's called. Or anything, I just want him to get his pref. It's an actual pref in Thracia, no one can use the lens but him. Which makes sense because it's literally a memento from Quan, his lord. So, you know, it's also a cruel reminder that he failed at his job. So, it's kind of an important thing. And the fact that he just decided, oh, just slap a normal Brave Lance, it's gonna be just cute. For the love of God, this is not funny. But, yeah. With that said, I think I'm gonna leave it at that. If there's anyone on the tier list you feel that should be potentially demoted, please tell me. I'd like to have a second opinion in some cases, just to make sure of what I'm thinking. I do think Eliwood might go up to S+, though. It kind of feels foolish for him not to be on there. But, yeah. That's about all I had to say here. In conclusion, this is okay. It's not really amazing. Mia is a really good AoE buster. Arthur is a good all-rounder. Basically, Echidna 0.5, or I guess 0.25, because 0.5 was Libra. But now better than the other two because he has a pref. And then there's Matilda and Clive, which, honestly, the main thing you can really do with them is just use them as stat buffs for other characters. It's just a worse Yato is the problem as a result. So, yeah, it's definitely awkward overall. Oh well. It's still overall decent enough, I guess I should say. But not exactly what I was hoping for Matilda. If anything, what they could have done is just give a brave effect to Clive when within 2 space of whoever he's supported to, and Matilda could have gotten something like Special Fighter when within 2 space of the person that she supported to. It would have differentiated the two of them a bit, because right now there's no reason to use Clive. Matilda just does everything Clive does but better. So, yeah. Kinda lame. Though, if Matilda had Special Fighter, that would make her a very good unit overall, because she has the stat line for Special Fighter in general anyway. And giving a Brave Weapon effect to Clive would make him actually a lot more interesting, and make his 34 attack actually a lot more helpful. Kind of feel like they dropped the ball on this one, but well. Not every character can be decent. And well, I don't think I have anything else to say here. So hey, I guess I'll be seeing you tomorrow to do my review on Kempf. Have a nice one, everyone.